Hi everyone, Leader here. Over the years I've been asked to do some tutorials about how I use the modal cycles and my workflow and such like that. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of time to make those kind of videos, and I'd love to do a big overview of what I do with the modal cycles. Just don't have the bandwidth right now. So what I thought instead I would do is offer you some tips, how I squeeze the most out of this little fantastic groove box. So let's check it out. One of my biggest things with the modal cycles is trying to create as many sounds as possible. And when doing so, you also have to think about using those sounds in the space, in the panorama. One unfortunate thing about the modal cycles is it does not allow you to lock the pan parameter via parameter locks from the step sequencer. I think most every other Elektron box does. I believe this and the modal samples, which is essentially the same kind of device with samples instead of synthesis, but it has that same limitation. So that's a big thing. When I'm creating Soundlocks, or if I'm just creating a track and I'm trying to squeeze as much as possible, I really want to be able to have different sounds that I'm using via Soundlocks be in different areas of the pan. If you're not familiar with a Soundlock, that is one of the best things about the Elektron sequencer, and the idea is you can snapshot an entire sound. Say you create a really great sound on one of these tracks, you can create a preset by saving it, and then you can recall that preset per step. So theoretically, if you had this maxed out at 64 steps, you could have 64 different sounds. Now, the problem is if you aren't able to p-lock or parameter lock the pan, all those sounds are going to sit in the very same spot on the pan. What I like to do is creating space with Soundlocks. And the idea here is that we're going to create a sound, which I already have loaded up. We have a sound, and I am going to save it as a snapshot or as a preset, and I'm going to position it in the pan area that I want. And what you can do beyond that is you can do with other parameters, but most importantly is you can create that same preset and snapshot it many times with the pan parameter being slightly different or drastically different, and therefore allowing you to kind of move that sound lock all across the pan. So let's do an example. So it's just a simple chord occupying single trigs here, 1 and 9. Now let's say if I wanted to have one of those sound off on the left side and the other on the right. Like I mentioned before, we can use an LFO to do that, but I absolutely don't want to do that. I want that LFO for sound design. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and start off by shifting the whole track. Let's just go not to the extreme left, but pretty good. And let's see what we got. Okay, so now both of those trigs are appearing on the left side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a preset, and I'm going to use that preset as a sound lock on the sequencer. So start by holding down function, hitting the machine button here. You can see the sub menu, preset menu. That brings us into the actual preset menu. We are in the folder area here first. I already created a folder. You can do so by hitting the function key again, and you'll see this little pop-up. If you scroll to the bottom, create folder. I've got one here called YT1. I'm going to click into it, so now that I'm in the folder, and now I'm going to save my preset here. And how I do that is by hitting function again, save preset. Let's go ahead and give it a name. Let's call it X9. And I'll just leave the rest for now just because I can clean that up later. I'm going to click once and then another to save it. You can see we have the preset there now. And I'm going to go ahead and lock that to the first trig. So if I hold down the trig while I'm in the preset menu and I click the encoder here, you'll see this light up indicating that we now have a sound lock. So the sound lock is there. Let's hear what we get. Okay, both sounds are still on the left-hand side, so we're not there yet. The idea now is that this one is permanently, just this trig, is permanently locked to the left side. So if I go ahead and just change the entire track over to the right, our regular trig, our non-sound-locked trig, should operate according to that parameter. Beautiful. Right there. So you can take this idea so much farther with not just the pan. You can do all sorts of parameters. You can do entirely different sounds. But what I really like to do when I do this is here's a little example. This is going to be a little jarring a little bit just because I'm really trying to show the extreme differences, but the idea here is I have the same sound, but it's moving and shifting all over the pan. So let's hear. So sometimes it's a little bit way over, sometimes it's a little bit shifted off, and then the extreme happens too. So you can think you have this really beautiful, say, a pad sound or something like that, and it's just gorgeous, but it's just sitting kind of in one side. You have to make space for other things. But say in a certain part of the song, you just want that thing all over, just percolating like rain or just craziness. And this is a great way to do it. You create a preset for each position you want that to sit in, and maybe add a few extra parameters for a nice little spiciness to it, and then you can sound lock all those presets all over your panorama, and it sounds great. It's a really good way to really squeeze more out of this little box. If we were to come over and listen to this hi-hat right here. Simple hi-hat, 16 steps. Where is it? Right there. And we are using every one of those steps. There's basically no room to do anything else on this particular track. However, we have some options. And what I like to do is I like to squeeze as much as I can onto a single track. This usually means I have to really use up all the tracks to kind of get those sounds all together, get them where I like in the pan, and get them, nice and affected the way I like and all that stuff. And then once I get to that point, I can start merging them to basically free up a few of these tracks to then kind of do it again and keep going until you've just really squeezed so much out of this machine. So the thing that I really like to do, and I almost always do, is I end up merging at least the hi-hats and the snare together. If I'm really short on space, or if I really want to squeeze the most out of here, I might even do a crash cymbal on there, and I'll show you how I do that. First thing is I am going to pan my hi-hats all the way to the right. Not all the way. Let's go like halfway to the right. Okay. And next, I'm going to bring in the snare here. Let's see if we got a snare already. Whoops. Good enough. So let's just say we had these two going. So the first thing I can do right off the bat is I can take out the hi-hats here. And you can hear there's a little bit of a gap, but honestly when the full song's going, you're not going to hear that. It's going to fill out. You can also fill it out a little bit more by, using a longer snare hit, as well as, like I said, other tracks eventually will fill in some more of that space, so it doesn't feel like it drops out as much. But honestly, if you listen to a drummer, you're going to hear a little bit of that gap if you isolated them. So if we have this already, let's go ahead and save the hi-hats as a preset. So if I'm on track 3, function, machine button to the preset menu. We are on folders, so I'm going to crank over to the YT folder that I have, click in to go in. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this by hitting function, save presets. We're going to call it, just call it HH. There. Click once, and then it'll ask you if you are sure. Yes, we want to save that preset. So now we have this guy here. Now I'm going to go ahead and mute this, and I'm going to come over here to track 2, and I'm going to go ahead and put all of these tracks on here. And I now have to remember that 5 and 13 are my snare hits, so I don't want to mess with these, but I'm going to hold 4 of these down at a time. Actually, I have to go back into the menu to get to that hi-hats. Usually it stays. I must have done something for it to jump away. Let's go HH. Okay, this is important now. If you just click this knob here, it's going to change all these trigs, because now it's going to change the track itself. We don't want to do that. We want to hold down trigs that we want to change, and then I'm going to click this. You can see the little light lights up here. Tell me that's a sound lock. You can always tell too if you hold it, you'll see that light up. I'll hold number 5, which we know is our track for our snare, our trig for our snare track. So that one does not. So you can see that one is not sound locked. This one is. So I'm going to do that a couple more times, avoiding the 5 and the 13. So right there, right there, right there. All right, let's hear what we got. So you can see I've turned these the hi-hats. In fact, we're going to go just down to 1 track. And you can hear the hi-hats are on the right. The snare is right in the middle. So that's great. We've already consumed one track instead of two, and we've had two sounds on it, and it sounds pretty natural and pretty good. Obviously, I would tweak these sounds and make them sound more, to my liking, but this just gives you the idea. Now, let's take it one step further. Say you want to crash. Crashes are going to usually ring out a little bit. You need some space for a crash. But the last thing I want to do is dedicate an entire track to just a crash cymbal. Even if I did that and then save the other, steps within that track for other sounds, it's still not ideal to me. So, again, going back to that idea of humanization, if you are pulling your hand as a drummer away from the hats to hit a crash, you do have a little space there. And in my opinion, you can kind of open that up a little bit. Yes, for a very busy song, you might crash and immediately start hammering on those hi-hats again, which is totally acceptable and great and is a good sound. But I feel like you can still let that crash ring out, wait a second to get those hi-hats going, and you don't lose too much of the drive of the song. Obviously, this depends on the song, but for me, it works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come over. We're looking at these 16 trigs. We are on track 2. We have the snare and the hi-hats going. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to hold this down. I already actually built a crash sound that I use. In fact, I always found that the Model Cycles, I had a hard time making a crash I really liked. So as soon as I found one I liked, I saved it. And I use it on every single thing I do. I obviously make little changes to it so it doesn't sound exactly the same. But it was so difficult for me to find a crash that I liked that I have a general saved preset for it. So I'm going to hold this down. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to go into the preset menu. I saved this one under leader and I called it Crasho. Boom. So if I have this set up here and I hold this down like before, it does show that it has a sound lock because I sound locked it to the hi-hat earlier. But now I'm going to override that and I'm going to click and now it is Crasho. So let's hear what it sounds like. Okay, couple things. One, the crash happens every time, which I'm going to adjust that here in a moment using a conditional trig. But also, there's not a lot of space. Now, it does work, if you just want that short crash. It has a little bit of delay on there, too, which is kind of helping fill out the space afterwards. That's not a bad crash, but honestly, I want that crash to ring out. I want it to really to give me that really good transition. So I'm going to do a couple of things. The first thing, like I mentioned, I'm going to fix the crash playing every time. I don't want it to play at the beginning every time. I want it just that one time. So I'm going to hold down that trig, use the chance conditional until I get to first. Let's hear what it sounds like. All right, well, the crash is not hammering every time. It's not going off every time. But we do have a large gap as this comes around. I don't want that. I really don't want that. So I'm going to address this first, and then I'm going to come after the crash and give that more space to ring out in the beginning. So we are hearing the gap because now we know that we have this first trig as a crash, but we've only got it playing on the first time, which means as it comes around the second time, there's nothing there for it to play. Here's a nice little tip. Come over here and engage the retrig function. Retrig, the idea is that it's going to retrig or replay that trig for the amount of times that you set. So if we're in the retrig menu, it is on now. The rate I'm going to keep is 16 because I want to basically just have one more 16th hit as that comes around. So I'm going to go scroll down. Length, I'm going to go and just, you don't have to really worry about it for this instance, but I like to set them correctly so that way if I do make a change, it's not going to fill. Because basically what I did right there, I told it instead of playing this trig here and then retrigging all the way around 4 steps, it's going to do only 2 steps. So it's going to do its own and then fill this one here. I am going to leave the fade alone for now. We'll talk about velocity and such in another tip. So I think we are good. Now let's hear. There you go. No gap. This is retrigging to fill in that empty slot over here. The last thing I want to do real quick is I want to give that crash some more space. So I'm going to hold these 3 down. These are hi-hats. And I'm going to come over and I'm going to hit the conditional trigs, the chance conditional. While holding these down, I'm going to do not first, meaning the very first time that this sequencer engages these trigs, it will ignore them. But the next time, it'll play them. So let's hear what we get now. All right, to me that sounds pretty good because what we did is we squeezed 3 different sounds, hi-hat, snare, and crash, all on the same track. We made that sound fairly natural. We gave space for the crash to ring out for a few steps. And to me, it doesn't sound like there's a big drop in sonic, fullness. So let's hear it one more time. So you can imagine if you had a big build up and you wanted to come into a crash and keep the song rolling, that'll work. And again, just one track. Another limitation of this little guy is, unfortunately, we do not have control, not direct control, of any sort of amp envelope or filter envelope for that matter. So, unfortunately, it means making pads and making slow attack sounds is a little bit more difficult, but not impossible. So what you're going to want to do, let's start off here with a simple sound. Give a nice little chord sound here. We do have to use the LFO for this, so we're going to lose a little bit of sound design capabilities. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to the setup of the LFO by hitting function, and then you have this little button that represents LFO. You can see underneath that is the submenu LFO setup. We are here. The first thing we're going to do is hit reset, and we'll come back and mess with the fade because that's a very important part of this. But for now, let's just make sure we have reset set. And if we come back to the LFO menu by just clicking the button without function, we can come over to the waveform, click into it, turn all the way over to envelope, and click again. We want to do the multiplier all the way down. We want this to be very slow. So as slow as we can get with the multiplier is 1. We are now going to go destination, and we're going to go to the volume and distortion. There we go. The depth right now, I'm just going to, let's say, 25. Let's just, 35. We'll start somewhere in the middle. Okay. So right now, if I go ahead and play this, oh, it just sounds really loud. I probably clipped a little bit on that. And the reason is because I have the LFO now hitting the volume parameter, but the volume parameter is already pretty high up. So it's basically taking where it's at and then increasing it more. We don't want that. We're going to turn this all the way down. We might turn it up a hair, just a little bit, depending on the song you're doing. Depending on the song, you might want, a pad sound that, kind of starts somewhere before it climbs, so you can kind of hear it immediately. It can get buried, basically, if you get in the mix there. However, we're going to try and make it start from nothing to go into something because, say, we want this for an intro or for a breakdown or something. So, okay, so let's hear what we have now. Okay, quieter, but it's still there. So the reason is we need to come over to the LFO setup again. Or I apologize. Before we do that, I'm going to go to this LFO speed here. I'm going to crank this down. Let's say 10 for now. Because again, I want this LFO to be very slow. With the multiplier set to 1, the speed of the LFO itself is down. I'm putting around 10 right now to start off. So let's go back into the LFO setup. Hold down function. Click the LFO button. The fade. So what we want to do here is we want a negative fade. We want this LFO to come in slow. So I'm going to do a negative fade by turning to the left. Let's start off, let's do like 20. So let's hear what we have now. Still coming in pretty fast. But here, let's go back to 0 so you can hear the difference. It shouldn't have that click. Yeah, it's much better. So I'm actually going to slow that down even more. Let's try 30. This is where it gets tricky because you only have so much length of this sound. So I'm going to increase the decay. Let's hear what we have now. And another thing to keep in mind is this is a monophonic sequencer or track, or it's 6 monophonic tracks, meaning if you play one note, the second note will cut it off if you don't let it finish. This is a chord engine, but it is essentially still monophonic. Like I can't play the chords. I can't play those individual notes all together. I could basically do one chord at a time. So that's something to keep in mind, but we can also play around a little bit with the reverb. So let's crank the reverb send to about 100, and I'm going to do reverb size up to about 100. And if you do need to play these notes a little quicker, this can kind of help with that cutoff. It's not as abrupt, but I think we can even slow this down a little bit more. So function LFO, let's do the fade at say 40. You can see we lose. I'm going to come back to about 35. So one thing actually, if we go back to 30 or 40, let's do that. Come back to this, to the LFO menu, increase the depth. This should give us some more volume. It's not much though. It's a little bit. I'm going to crank it all the way. It's a little better. This might be one of those times where either you gotta have to make some choices. So if I decrease the fade a little bit, I'm gonna go back to 38, negative 38. And let's make that speed go down even lower, get it real slow. There you go. You can obviously do some parameters in here and do some parameter locking to kind of change up some things, maybe have some jump-in effects here and there, but essentially that is the way that you get a slow attack or pad swell sound on the modal cycles. First thing we'll play here is 16-step hi-hats, straightforward, same velocity, same decay, everything's the same. Very sterile in my opinion. Can totally be great for, you know, for certain kinds of songs. Maybe you want that sterile machine sounding drums, but I'm going to try and make these a little more human sounding. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mess with the velocity. So velocity, to affect that, you're going to need to hold down a trig, and you'll see this menu changes just a little bit. It tells you the note value of that trig, the velocity, and the length. So what I honestly like to do with a good driving hi-hat is I like to have a little, I wouldn't call it swing, it's more like swing in the velocity, you know, where you're hammering, but every other hi-hat is a little bit less, so it kind of gives you that like kind of sound. So let's hear. So if I take every other trig of the first 8, I hold down 2, 4, 6, 8. I come down, I have to click to get to the velocity. There I am. I'm going to turn this down. I'm going to do probably a little more drastic than I normally would because I want you to hear it. So let's do 65. So 1, 3, 5, and 7, we're just dealing with the first 8 right now, are going to be playing at full velocity, or 100 velocity, not full, 100. And then 2, 4, 6, 8 are going to be playing at 65. So let's go ahead. You know what? Just to make it sound good, I'm going to copy. This is interesting. When you copy paste, you do need to hold down all the trigs you want to copy, but you only hold down the first trig you want to paste. So boom, 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 boom. All of these 12, 14, and 16 are now coming off of this one. We now have every other step hitting 65 velocity. The main ones are going to be hitting 100. So let's hear what it sounds like. You know, I'm going to go even more because I feel like it's still kind of hard to hear. And it's fairly subtle, but you can hear a little dip. Let's go back and hear what it sounded like originally. So if I reload the pattern, big difference. So I'm going to go back and do this one more time real quick. Boom, boom, boom. Hold this down to 65. Copy, paste. So it's got a much more kind of groove to it. Now, if you really want to go all out, you're going to want to change the velocity pretty much for every hit, but you really want to kind of make the off hits, the 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. You can kind of play with them. So maybe not 65 for every one of those, maybe between 55 and 70, and just kind of do some random adjustments in there. Kind of gives it more, you know, a real drummer is not going to hit those velocity levels consistently like that. So that's the first part. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a subtle LFO on the decay. Now, you have some amazing options when it comes to velocity modulation in the other bigger Elektron boxes. And this little guy, this is kind of the best you can kind of do without parameter locking each step individually. So what I'm going to do with the LFOs, I have it right now set to the decay. I'm going to keep it at 16 because we are using a 16-step pattern right now, and it is hitting each one of those as occupying 1/16th note. I'm going to create the depth just a little bit. I'm going to say we'll try just 1 to get off, to get going. And the last thing I like to do, you can choose whatever waveform that really suits you best, but I like to use the random. So this way, we're basically creating a little bit more decay on the end of each one of these hits. Well, technically a little bit more, a little bit less, because our LFO is bipolar. So it's basically saying every time that drummer hits it, it's going to be slightly different. Just about every time. Using the random gives you that randomness, so makes it a little bit more natural. Let's hear what we got. You can hear how some of the hats are tight, some of them are a little loose, and that's great. So I'm going to come here just to show you, whoops, how drastic that can sound. I should mention as well, if you go into function LFO setup, you can set the reset so it makes sure, but it should be functioning the way we want anyways, because I'm using 16 as our resolution on the LFO. But let's go ahead and do that anyways, because if you do choose to use a different resolution, then that might actually make a difference. All right, so we have this here. I'm going to increase the depth is at 10.7, which is going to be pretty drastic, so you should be able to hear it really, really clearly. And I definitely use this a little more drastically. Maybe not that drastic, but I might go like 5. And when you have other drums going on, snare, you got some crashes, maybe some percussion, it fits in really nicely and kind of gives a nice kind of like syncopated feel to it. But for more humanistic kind of levels, we're probably going to stick around 1. Again, I'll play you exactly. This is what it sounds like now versus what it sounded like before. Big difference in my opinion. A big thing for me is kind of avoiding just the 5 and 13, the and hits for the snare. There's so much more. If you watch a real drummer, they might be hitting like an 8th note hi-hat and playing the snare, but they're kind of adding these like little flourishes and these little ghost notes and stuff in there, and it just brings out so much more life in the drums. So by using ghost notes and retrigs together, we can kind of bring some of that through on the modal cycles. If you're not familiar with what a ghost note is, the idea is that it's a very, very light hit that you can barely hear, but it just adds a little bit more flavor to your beat. And a really good drummer knows how to pepper those in at the right time. So we have our snare. Very simple, basically on the 5 and the 13, the 2 and the 4 of a bar. So if we want to add some more spice to that, we can do 2 things. We can add some retrigs to give some sort of like flams and swells, and we can use the ghost notes to kind of pepper in a little bit there. So if I go ahead and start, let's say, I like to do this sometimes where I wrap around a main hit with a very low velocity pair of hits. So let's try 12. Let's hear what that sounds like. Okay, we're getting something there. Honestly, I probably would keep them about that level when I have a full song cranking, because the lower you go, the less you're going to be able to hear it. And if you've got a nice mix going, these little hits right here are going to barely be audible, which is kind of what you want. You want it to be there so maybe they don't even know they hear it, but their ear can hear it. So I'm going to come down a little bit more just because we're only focusing on the snare right now. You can kind of hear just barely there, very light. And I'm going to crank it down even more, down to 2, so you can really hear how a ghost note's going to sound. Almost not even there. It's crazy. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of some retrigs here to kind of add a little extra bit to those little ghost notes. So if I hold down this and click the retrig, click it again to turn it on, you can scroll up and click on and off as well, but that's a nice little trick to double hit the retrig button. We are going to do a rate of 32. I'm going to come over to the length, bring that down to 1/8. I'm going to fade up just a hair. You can already hear it. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to extend this one a little bit longer. So if we come velocity all the way down, retrig, let's do a fade of 3. Very, very light. Like I mentioned before, I'll probably increase the velocity of those ghost notes and retrigs a little bit when the full mix is going, because you won't be able to hear them pretty much at all. But right now we can hear just a little bit. And if we add one more layer, let's go with 4 and 11, we're going to do a chance of 25%. So that means it's not going to happen every time. Hopefully 1 out of every 4 times, but when you're doing the probabilities, it's not perfect. If you want that kind of control, you need to go into the actual step. So if we go all the way over here and crank till we get, so you can do 2 out of 3 or the first 1 out of every 4, but I'm going to stick with the 25% because I like the sort of randomness of it. Now here's another thing, is we know this one's going off every time, but I only want it to happen when this one's happening here. So this is a really great, very important trig condition to know, and that is the pre. This is very smart. What the pre does is it looks to a previous trig conditioned trig. It's kind of a mouthful. It doesn't look to ones that don't have a trig condition on it. It's only looking to ones that do have a trig condition. This trig condition is 25%. So whenever this one goes off, this one's set to pre, will go off with it. If it doesn't go off, it gets ignored. It's genius. I love that. I mean, you can do so much fun stuff with that. So we can pepper this out even more. So I'm going to go ahead and take this guy and just put him all over the place. 25%, so it's not going to happen every time. And I might even actually take some of these and take the retrig off just by double clicking. See, this one doesn't need to be a retrig. Okay. So now that is how you basically increase the liveliness or the humanity of your drums, if that makes sense. If I'm not going to mix or merge the hats and the snare or whatever, but in this case, let's say the hats and the snare, I can actually utilize this neighbor condition to make sure that my drummer is not playing with all of a sudden 3 or 4 hands. Like he's just got 2 hands. And I want to make sure, even with my complex arrangements, even when I'm using percentages for conditional trigs, even when I'm doing all sorts of wacky stuff, that I don't have to then go back and be like, oh, I think I heard a snare and a hi-hat at the same time. Let me fix that. I can do it, in a sense, I can make it sort of automatic or automate that in a way. It's not automated, but it's the idea is that once I have this set up in a way, then any changes I make further will follow that neighborhood condition. Let's listen to our track with the hi-hats. I'm going to mute everything else just in case I have something there. So you're not going to see a drummer generally playing. I mean, he could be doing this. He could be, hitting 16 notes on one hand. It's not that fast. Let's increase the speed just to kind of give that drummer a real hard time. Okay. If your drummer can do that, I mean, wow. If you can play one-hand hi-hats at that speed and be rolling the snare, keep that drummer. Pay him whatever he wants, because that is an amazing, amazing ability. And so let's just say, though, most drummers, maybe no drummers, are going to be able to really do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to sit and expect those hi-hats to be cranking whenever that snare is not happening. And how we do that is by doing neighbor conditional trigs. So I go to track 3. This is my hi-hats. I did leave 5 and 13 off. Like I mentioned before, I know those snare hits, I want those to happen every time. So I know that there's going to be no hi-hats there. But for every other one, I hold down and I turn this chance conditional knob over to neighbor. I want it to not play. So I want the line over neighbor, meaning when it evaluates the track before it, it's going to look for any of those trigs that are set as conditional. That's another thing. I'll kind of wrap this idea up here in a second, but it's going to look for any trigs that do have a condition, a trig condition, and if there is one there, it will not play here. Let me give you a little bit more info on the neighbor conditional trig. A trig condition that is looking at another trig only looks at trigs that have a condition on it. So, for example, 5 and 13, I don't need to put a conditional trig on these at all because I want them to play every time. And I already took that into account on this track by eliminating 5 and 13. So there will never be a chance of those playing at the same time. However, you can see all of these guys. I have these set as percentages, 25%. I think that's what I did for all of them. And so anytime one of those plays, because they do have that 25% trig condition on there, any of these that are set to the non-neighbor conditional trig will not play. I know that's a lot. It's very confusing, which is maybe kind of the reason I avoided the neighborhood for a while. I understood it, but it just seemed like it was a lot to think about. But I implore you to read the manual and to play with it, because once you lock that in, it is going to open up so much. So I did already set these. I can verify by holding them down, just lightly twisting, just enough so it doesn't change the parameter. Okay, neighbors, not neighbor, all across. So if I come back over here, I just want to make sure you can see this lights up if I hold it, meaning it does have a condition, 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 condition. You can see 13 and 5 do not. So now anytime one of these 25% condition trigs plays, it's going to mute the trig on this. So let's hear. So you can hear what's going on, but it's not enough. For one, I'm going to increase the velocity level because, like I mentioned, it gets buried when you start having stuff with a lot of volume. I'm going to increase the chance parameter to 75, so we're going to hear it happen more. 10, 11, 15. I try to get as many of the trigs held down as once at the same time because it'll save you some time. So let's do 10. I can't remember what I did on those, but hopefully that. And 75%. So now we should hear it more drastically. Again, this is something you really got to play with to figure out exactly what you want it to sound like, but this is enough to show you. I'm going to add kick here. So right there, we've got a nice busy pattern happening, and believe it or not, I mean, it's a difficult pattern for a drummer to play, but potentially he has the ability to, because he's never playing hi-hats and snare at the same exact time, meaning he's got enough hands to do it. So to wrap everything up, you can really, really squeeze a lot out of this beautiful little box. If you're patient, if you're willing to put the time in, and honestly, once these concepts click, it'll happen faster. You'll be able to move through it faster, but you can turn a monophonic, 6 monophonic tracks into way more sound than that. The highlights being Soundlocks. Gotta use Soundlocks if you want more sounds. The ability to merge those tracks by using Soundlocks and conditional trigs. And then also humanizing the drums using all sorts of little tricks, but including conditional trigs, using retrig, and using velocity. Those are your kind of big ones that you want to focus on when you're humanizing the drums. So I hope this has been helpful. These things took me time to learn them on my own, and I hope that maybe this will save you some time and you can use them to squeeze a lot of life out of this box. I will say, when I first got this, I felt a bit constrained, feeling like after just laying down tracks of drums that I basically had 2 tracks left, one for bass and then one for chords, and then I had to figure out how to squeeze a lead in there. And that's kind of where this started. And I started looking more into the manual. I love reading manuals, so I'm a little obsessed. I started really diving into those conditional trigs. I started diving into making sure to use velocity properly to kind of give some more human, natural sounding drums. Trig conditions, Soundlocks. I mean, when you really put it all together, this thing is a powerhouse, and you can really create some beautiful songs, very complex songs with it, as long as you're willing to put in the time and the effort. So I hope, again, that was helpful. Please throw any questions in the comments that you would like answered. I would love to do some future videos too, so let me know what you think of this one. And of course, like and subscribe, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.